Hello and a very warm welcome to the introductory webinar to the 2024 IFRA Volume of Use survey. IFRA is preparing its Volume of Use survey, which is conducted about every 4 years. The VoU survey collects volumes of fragrance ingredients used only for the manufacturing of fragrance mixtures. My name is Charles Delisnio. I'm Global Communications Director at IFRA, and I will be welcoming the speakers in a minute. But for a little bit of information for you as participants, I'd like to clarify that there will be time for Q&A at the end of the session. But in the meantime, you can put your Q&A questions in the Q&A section and not in the chat section. And the session is being recorded. So please take that in mind. But in any case, when we do your questions, you will not be on camera. You will only we will read out the selected questions for the speakers to answer. I would now like to take the opportunity to welcome the speakers. These are Matthias Vey, Vice President for Scientific Affairs, Jennifer Dortz, Scientific and Regulatory Affairs Manager. Both of those are my colleagues at IFRA, and Kristen Saxi-Vasquez, Director of Technical Information and Services at the Research Institute for Fragrance Materials. And with that information out of the way, I thank you for joining us and wish you an interesting webinar. And I would now like to welcome Matthias Vey to take the stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles, for the introduction, and welcome everybody to our webinar introducing the 2024 IFRA Volume of Use survey. We, as mentioned by Charles, are going to have 3 speakers. I'm going to get off explaining a little bit the purpose and the background of the survey, and then we will have intervention of Kristen Saxi-Vasquez on how to report chemicals, and my colleague Jennifer on how to report naturals. So let me start with the purpose of the survey. There's actually 4 key elements that make us do the survey regularly, as was mentioned, about every 4 to 5 years. One of the key outcomes is to help us establish the IFRA transparency list, so the snapshot in time that we do to show which materials are currently in use. That is a list that you actually find later on the updated version on the IFRA website. Also, when it comes to new materials that have not been reported before, those are going to be fed into the RIFM safety assessment process. So this survey also helps us to understand which materials are new, have not been used before, and therefore need to undergo the safety assessment in the RIFM process. The volume of use is an additional very important information in general for the RIFM safety assessment program, and specifically for the environmental risk assessment, where the volume of use is actually a key parameter in performing the risk assessment. Last but not least, we are very often faced with challenges when it comes to regulatory developments, and it's important then to understand which ingredients might eventually be in the scope. So it's very helpful for us to have the outcome of the volume of use survey to understand which materials are in use and at which volume. Next slide. So our plan is to launch this survey end of March this year, end of March 2024. As before, it's planned to be open for about 6 months. What we ask to report is the fragrance ingredients volumes that were in use in the calendar year 2023. We know there's always some confusion on the date, so it's a 2024 survey, but the survey period is the year 2023. The focus is on fragrance ingredients volumes used for the manufacturing of mixtures that are sold either to other fragrance houses in the form of premixtures or to the finished consumer product manufacturers. What's very important, this is a relevant survey for us, but the data that we collect from you are treated anonymous when it comes to data aggregation, so it's not possible from the outcome of the survey to retrieve the individual reportings, and everything is handled under fully confidentiality. We are going to send out with the survey, with the introductory letter, in a document of instructions that summarizes a number of do's and don'ts, what we have experienced over the year, where the participants might need to have support. So we have put that in a document. And it, for example, explains which materials are in and out. And we very often get questions whether or not oral care products should be in scope. Yes, they are in scope because they're also in scope of the RIFM safety assessment. So we detail which oral care product should be reported, the volumes of the ingredients used there. Also, there are sometimes issues around complex chemical materials, how to report those. There is guidance, for example, also on this. We also ask you, when it's about pre-diluted materials, to separate the solvent from the actual neat fragrance material. Again, there is guidance to this regard in the document. As mentioned before, you will hear more on how to report chemicals and naturals, and specifically for the natural complex substances, there is also a lot of information in the guidance, as well as with regard to complex chemicals. So it's very advised to look into this document first before actually filling in the data sheets for reporting. Slide. So I was referring to data sheets. To support the reporters, we are sharing 2 Excel files, 2 tables, one to report discrete chemicals, the second one to report the natural complex substances. You will find as a basic information in these sheets the ingredients reported in either of one of the last 2 surveys, either in the last one, either in the one before, or eventually reported in both. If you do not find your material in either of those, or therefore you will not find it in the Excel sheet, then you have to report it as a new material, and you will get some information on how to do that and which obligations come along with doing that by Kristen, for example. These sheets are very much helping us to facilitate the data processing, so we urge you to report your volumes by using these Excel files. Then we can much easier and much more reliably process the data into the aggregated system, and thereby we minimize the risk of having errors or having materials misreported. Next slide. We have always been reporting by region, so we request you to report for the European, Middle East, and Africa region called EMEA. The other region is North America, which combines United States and Canada. The next region is Central and South America, which we combine. And last but not least, we have the Asia Pacific region. But this year, we request you, different to the survey before, to report Asia Pacific and Japan separately. The reason for that is that we have received requests from RIFM that due to their capability of doing the environmental safety assessment, they would request Japan to be reported separately because their wastewater treatments are following similar patterns and treatment scenarios that we have in North America and Europe. Therefore, they would like to have those volumes separated because they can make similar assumptions and approaches to predict the PACs, the predicted environmental concentrations. For the rest, if I may say so, of the Asia Pacific region, please combine those volumes. We will have that again outlined in detail in the instruction. Next slide. So that already brings my part to the end. It is extremely important that we get good data. These data, as I mentioned, are the basis for a number of very important activities that we do, including the safety assessment. So we need accurate data as best as possible. We also need to have a broad database, so we request that as many companies as possible join this exercise. We know it's labor intensive, but the quality of the data increases with a number of companies participating and reporting, which is similar to all the other exposure exercises we do, and which actually are very unique and putting our industry in an extremely unique position that we have this information because many other industries do not have. To our member associations, we kindly ask that they distribute, as before, all the documents and the survey to ensure that we reach all our members. But we will also distribute the survey as broadly as we can, because we will collect any volume of use information that we can get. With this, I would then hand over now to my colleague at RIFM, Axel, to talk a little bit more on the details of reporting chemicals. Thank you.
Okay, great. Just go ahead and share my screen. Silver. Okay. So following up on Matthias's overview, I'm just going to go into a little bit more detail on some of the specifics and the implications of reporting in the volume of use survey. So first off, we want to acknowledge that we understand that these surveys take a lot of time and effort, and it's one of the reasons that they're only conducted every 4 to 5 years, because they are so time consuming. And that's really true on our side as well. But we want to stress that it is very important, and we truly appreciate the work and effort that you put into reporting correctly. So one of the reasons that the survey is so important is because RIFM IDs are based on the volume of use reporting. So in the past, whenever a company would submit information on a new material, or if they just submitted toxicological studies on a material that wasn't already in the database, we would automatically assign a RIFM ID. And now, and for the last couple of surveys, that's not the case. It's only when a material is reported on the survey that a material either maintains or is given a new RIFM ID. And it's important because the RIFM ID is the way a material will get a safety assessment. So it has to have a RIFM ID to get a safety assessment. And as Matthias mentioned before, when we evaluate all the results, if a material has not been reported in one of the last 2 surveys, we consider it an inactive fragrance material, and the RIFM ID is removed. So that does result in some toggling on and off of those RIFM IDs. So there is, and there can be, some disconnect between the RIFM ID and the safety assessment. So that's really just for awareness. It's only in a very limited number of cases. But as an example, a RIFM material may already have a safety assessment published on it, but in the upcoming survey, it may lose its RIFM ID. And that's just the dynamic nature of the work that we do. So what gets reported? Again, chemicals and naturals that are used for their odor properties, and flavor materials. I didn't add it to the slide. Flavor materials only for oral care products, as Matthias mentioned. But please make a note of that, because we might come back to you with questions. So if it is an oral care product for flavor, please note that in your survey. Functionals, and those are materials that are deemed necessary for the functionality or the stability of a fragrance ingredient or compound. And captives should also be reported. So these are proprietary materials that are only manufactured by one company, and that's generally for a limited amount of time. And the functionals and the captives will not have a RIFM safety assessment written for them. They do not have RIFM IDs. And a reminder that captive materials and their data are available in the RIFM database, but they're only seen by RIFM staff. And for all of the materials that are reported on the volume of use survey, regardless of the type, they're all published on the IFRA transparency list on the IFRA website. So we do get questions about discrete chemical reporting, how to report isomeric mixtures. And the key question really is if the material is available individually. If it's not available individually, we generally request that you assign all the volume to a main CIS number. So we really rely on the reporting companies to supply that information. And you can do that directly in the survey. So here's just a small snapshot from the chemical portion of the survey. And you can see over on the right-hand side, I've highlighted in yellow the isomer field. Now, those isomers are directly from the RIFM database. So if we're aware of isomers, we enter them in and we include them here. But all the way on the right-hand side in the highlighted column for the comments is where if you have an isomeric mixture or a reaction mixture, we ask that you note it there. We do take note of all the comments that are submitted. So any of that information can be put in there. Also, a confirmation of where you want the volume allocated, that's helpful. The functional, I also highlighted that as well. Again, that comes from the database, but if you have any comments, you can add that as well. And then all the way over on the left-hand side is the material ID. Now, this is somewhat of an unknown identification number, but it's very important for us because it's helpful in using and mapping data and their materials. So it's used for the NCSs especially because a lot of the naturals share CAS numbers. So again, as Matthias mentioned, we really stress that you use the format as it's provided to you because the material IDs allow for that easy mapping. Now, if you search the survey thoroughly and you cannot find your material, you can add a new material, as Matthias mentioned. There will be an extra spreadsheet on the bottom of both the NCS and the chemicals workbooks where you can add new materials. So we'll have the format will be very similar. You'll see the material ID and the RIFM ID obviously won't be populated because it hasn't been assigned yet. But everything else in that table, we really appreciate if you could fill that out as comprehensively as possible. Sorry. CAS number, INEX number, EC number, any synonyms like hexamethyl chicken wire. Please put as much information as you can because we do use SciFinder and ECHA to confirm the identity, but obviously we don't have the company information and knowledge that you do. Also, in the last two columns are the functional and the captive notes. So if you're submitting a new material, please note if it's a functional or a captive, because if we don't know, it'll start to go through the safety assessment process. And also, if it's a captive, if I don't know that it was to be assigned a captive when I entered into the database, then that information would be open to all subscribers. So if you do submit a new fragrance ingredient, please be aware that you may need to provide a sample for that material. You definitely will need to submit concentration data for the CREM model. And then if it's an NCS, you'll need to provide components for that NCS. Also with the naturals, you'll need to provide the processing code. And Jennifer's going to go into that in her presentation next with that and other NCS identifiers that are important. And if we are not able to get any of those specific items, then we're unable to conduct a safety assessment. So we will put the materials on a proposed not supported list, and it'll stay there for about a year. We'll do email blasts looking for support of those materials. But again, if we don't get that information, we can't conduct a safety assessment and the RIFM ID comes off. So we are happy to add new materials, but please be prepared to supply that subsequent information that's needed. And then just to wrap it up, so a volume of use equals RIFM ID, a RIFM ID equals a safety assessment, and don't be afraid to use that comment area for your isomeric mixtures, captives, etc. Any notes that you want to let us know about your materials. So thank you. And with that, I will turn it over to Jennifer.
So thanks, Kristen, for giving me the floor to discuss about the natural ingredients, known as the natural complex substances, or NCSs. So the reporting of the natural ingredients is often more complicated than for the chemically defined ingredients. This is due to many qualities having different composition, which may be explained by various origins, different extraction methods, and different part of the plant use. Therefore, a proper identification of the NCSs is important for an accurate reporting. Unlike the chemicals, CAS numbers assigned to the NCSs do not allow an accurate identification of these substances. As you can see on the slide, one CAS number may cover a large number of NCSs. In this context, IFRA, in collaboration with RIFM, has set up a specific nomenclature to characterize with as much specificity as possible the NCSs used in the fragrance industry. So we use a code with 3 elements. 1, the botanical species, represented by the RIFM number. 2, the part of the plant used, represented by a letter. And 3, the extraction method, represented by a number. As an example, the lavender oil, where the botanical species, Lavandula angustifolia, is represented by the RIFM number 169. The part of the plant flower is represented by the letter F. And the extraction method, the essential oil by steam distillation, is represented by the number 2.12. So the list of the letters and numbers that we use and their respective meanings can be found on the RIFM database website, as well as on the IFRA website as shown here on the slide. Plus, both lists will also be available in the instruction for the 2024 Volume of Use survey as attachment 3. So now let's look a little more closely to both lists. First, the letters, which represent the part of the plant that is used. There are 13 letters from A to M, as shown here on the slide. And since the previous survey, clarification have been made for the letters E, F, and H. These are highlighted here in pale orange on the slide. Second, the numbers, which represent the processing method. So it's important to note that the processing code that we use and that are shown here on the slide are based on a variation of the ISO norm 9235 second edition. So we have 41 main categories and 11 subcategories. And you can find the full description of these processing methods in the RIFM database or in the ISO norm 9235. Since the previous survey, there have been new coded added. These are represented here in pale yellow and are, for instance, 2.1.2, which is the absolute X list, for which I will show you an example on the next slide. So the example is for the oak moss and tree moss absolute low atranol and chloroatranol. The processing code previously reported in the previous survey were 2.1 or 2.33. However, they were not considered adequate to properly describe that the ingredient did undergo additional treatment to reduce the level of atranol and chloroatranol. Therefore, we have created a new code, which is 2.1.2 X less absolute, which should now be used. So the nomenclature is used in the RIFM database, has the RIFM ID next to the CAS number. And going back to our example, for the botanical species Lavandula angustifolia and the part of the plant flower, you can see here that there are multiple processing methods reported. Let's now move on with the Volume of Use Survey 2024. So with the launch of the survey at the end of March, there will be a specific Excel file for reporting the NCSs. And again, we insist on using only this file for the reporting. It contains about 1,000 lines. Each is an NCSs reported in at least one of the 2 last surveys, and several columns with identification information as shown here on the slide. As previously explained by Kristen, if you use an ingredient not listed in the spreadsheet, we ask you to add them separately with as much information as possible. So here is a snapshot from the Excel file for reporting the NCSs. And I would like to point out 2 things. First, the NCSs may have multiple valid CAS numbers. So please have a close look at those 2 columns while you are reporting your material. And there is also the nomenclature that I described earlier. This nomenclature has already been applied in the 2 last surveys, so we hope that you will continue to pay a special attention to it. Before concluding, I would like to stress that accuracy in reporting ingredients based on their identity is very important. Indeed, it is crucial that you assign your volumes to the quality that you are actually using. In case of doubt, we encourage you to consult the instruction and/or to reconfirm with your supplier. And I would like to end my presentation with some frequent issues that we face when we receive the volume of use data. Here on the slide, you can see some examples that are valid for both the chemicals and the NCSs. And so, for instance, we could have the CAS number not identified, or a name that do not match with the CAS number. Sometimes we also have material that are mixture or reaction products. And more specifically for the NCSs, sometimes we don't find the botanical name, or the processing code is not entered for the new material. And finally, we also often have an issue when the processing code does not indicate that, does not match with the material reported. And here you have an example. And so if you have any question, you can reach us now or during the survey. And I would like to inform you that we are planning to organize a Q&A session after the launch of the survey on April 12th. So during this upcoming Q&A session, you can ask any question, and we will be happy to answer to your questions. And I'm done.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Thank you also, Kristen and Matthias, for your presentations. I'd now invite you all to turn on your cameras and microphones, panelists, so that we can take the questions that have come in so far. I will likely just go through these in order as they've come, unless something really stands out. So let's just start with the first that came. This was from Sabine Moneyron. I apologize if I've brutalized your surname, ma'am. So who asks, what do we consider as complex materials? So who would like to take that from the panelists?
I can take it. So I think that question came in pretty early, probably when I first mentioned the natural complex substances. So that's what we were referring to as the naturals or essential oils. There are complex materials in the isomeric mixtures that we mentioned as well, and reaction mixtures. So anything that's more than one material that's available only together.
Thank you. That's very clear. Good. In which case, I think the next one is also for you, Kristen. So this is from an anonymous attendee. For the material RIFM ID, the number processing method 2.xxx indicated is not according to the last ISO 9235 column 2021 update version that begins with 3.xxx. Should we use the 2.xxx previous version?
I think Jennifer mentioned it. What we really use like a variation of that ISO standard, so it really should be followed the previous version. But the best version to use is the one that Jennifer mentioned. It's either available on the RIFM database or the IFRA website, just because we took us kind of a snapshot at a certain time and we've modified it since then, but we don't follow exactly what the ISO standard is.
Thank you very much. Then another anonymous attendee. What difference is there between botanical name, which can be multiple, and binomial names? Is that clear?
I'm balking a little bit on X here, but to my understanding, binomial is more broader, not just for plants. It's any type of species, but botanical is the botanical part, the botanical species. It doesn't describe something different, but I think binomial is broader in what it covers. As we focus on plants, botanical name is what we typically refer to.
Thank you. Then Ben Silverberg asks, the additional CAS numbers column didn't have any delimiters. It will make it difficult to pass for data lookups in external systems. Can you make sure all columns are delimited if listing multiple values? It's a technical question.
I can take that, and it's we can definitely look into doing that.
Okay. And then for identity, should IUPAC numbers be included in the table? Or I'm not sure if that's can or should, because it's not written. So a comment on IUPAC numbers. Can they be included in the table?
Numbers. At this point, I don't believe that we have a comprehensive list of all the IUPAC numbers, so I don't think that we could probably do that at this point.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Kristen.
Okay, very good. Then another anonymous attendee. Could it be possible to explain again why Japan now needs to be reported separately?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that on. It is actually, again, the main driver here is the RIFM environmental safety assessment aspect. And Japan in the Asia Pacific region is quite different when it comes to water treatment equipment, so how the wastewater is treated. And this treatment is relatively similar to what we know from Europe and the United States. And this is very important. And then now I would need to refer to an environmental expert in the prediction of the no effect concentration. So by singling out Japan, we can, let's say, give it better attention and be more fair with regard to the environmental safety assessment, rather than mixing it up with the rest of Asia Pacific, where we have less information on how the wastewater is treated. So it will be for the benefit of the environmental safety assessment to have these volumes separated out.
Thank you very much. And so then a question from Helen Meng. Thank you for the presentation. Where could we find the document on the precisions on the oak moss tree?
This is going to be mentioned in the instruction. As it's a new code, you will have a full description of what I explained in the instruction that will be shared with the survey.
Thank you very much. Then next question for Asia. Are there only IFRA members providing the survey results, or does it include local manufacturers?
Everybody that is manufacturing fragrances and willing to share the information with us is welcome. For example, we know that some customers do create fragrances themselves. They are not really directly IFRA members, but we are more than welcome, and we always have been, to collect the volume. So anybody willing to share information, whether or not IFRA member, is more than welcome. Because as mentioned before, the reliability of the survey outcome much depends on the participation. The more, the better the database.
That's very clear, thank you. Then Dr. Piyush Modi asks, can you provide more detail about the C14 test?
I don't even think we mentioned that. I'm not sure. I see the context here to the volume of use survey. Maybe we can invite the person to address us by email and specify the question, and then we will be following up with the answer.
Yes, so Dr. Modi, if you'd like to specify that question, you can write to us at info@ifrafragrance.org, and if it is a question we can answer, we will attempt to do so there. Thank you very much. Then, what do you do about duplicate reporting? For example, if a head office of a fragrance company reports a material, and some of that material is exported to a subsidiary abroad, is that subsidiary expected to report the material again?
Again, this is the coordination that we're expecting. So it should only be that part of the fragrance house reporting who sells to the finished consumer product manufacturer or to a company outside of that company structure. If they would sell, for example, a pre-mixture to a competitor, then that would also be the moment it should be reported. But shipping volumes in-house, it should be there reported where it really, in brackets, hits the market later on, where it's used by a finished consumer product manufacturer.
And that is, in fact, another question related to another question that's just come up, which is how do we have to report mixtures supplied from competitors? And I believe you've more or less answered that question as well.
I would hope so, yes.
Good, so that's very good. Does another question, of course, does the Excel include all transparent lists, or only the frequent ones used in the last 5 years?
I can take that. It's basically based on the last transparency list. So every survey that we send out is generally based on the transparency list from the previous one.
It is extremely clear, thank you. Alexandro Juarez asks, says, thank you for the presentation. Will carriers be reported as well? I'm not sure what's specified by carriers.
Yeah, exactly. If I understand it correctly, it would fall in our understanding of functional materials, and then it would be reported. What we are not asking to report, if we talk about shell materials of encapsulated fragrances, that is not to be reported, but this is also, I believe, clearly in the instructions. So if that's the understanding of carriers, if it would be encapsulation material, no, that would not be reported. If it's a solvent or any other functionality material, then it's in the survey scope.
And a final Q&A question currently from Bhargav Desai. In case of adding delimiters, it would be great to ensure the spacing is consistent and that there are no additional spaces after or before the text or numbers in every column, presumably for data manipulation after the fact.
Yeah. And I can take that, Bhargav, that's a good question. And we will take another look and make sure that the spacing is correct. But that's also if sometimes people are using their own databases to populate that table. So please be mindful there too of if there are additional spaces, then when we go to process it, it does make it a little more difficult. But we will double check that.
Very good. We've just had another one, I'm afraid. Another two, just as we've said. So Aline Philippe asks, when are documents with the RIFM ID to become mandatory? For example, in the case of the SDS data sheets, the REACH or the FDA?
Yeah, I'm not sure that we're covering that the scope doesn't
so
cover that.
That falls out of scope in this particular case.
Thank you.
And then there's another question, which is sort of the C14 question again. Carbon 14 content to calculate how much of the product is derived from plant components versus the petroleum derived components.
All right, that brings us maybe a bit closer to the earlier question. And I'm happy to start, but Kristen, please jump in. But when it comes to ingredients for our survey, we do not differentiate between them being synthetically produced or extracted from nature. What we care about is what of them and how much is used in a fragrance mixture. Kristen, would you agree to that?
Agree, yes.
Okay, well, I thank all of the panelists for answering the questions. I will leave a few seconds if anyone has any outstanding Q&A questions that they would like to ask. Now would be the opportunity to write them in. However, as Jennifer mentioned, there will in fact be a specific Q&A webinar where you can ask all your questions, and we will in fact around that time also likely try and open a means for questions to be given to us in advance so that we can prepare them specifically with good answers that are clear for all attendees. And again, there will be further instructions distributed publicly, most likely on through the means of the IFRA website, on the volume of use survey when it is launched in a few weeks' time. With that, I would like to offer the panelists the opportunity to give any closing remarks if they would like to. Matthias, Jennifer, Kristen, anything you'd like to say?
I'm happy to start off, Charles. Thanks a lot. I'm already now thanking those who take the effort to participate in the survey. I think we hope we were able to point out the value of this information, but Kristen mentioned it and I mentioned it. We understand it is quite an effort for the participants. So thanks in advance for doing the effort, but it's for the greater benefit, I would say, of the industry. Thank you.
I think I'll just add, especially with the NCSs, just reach out with any questions. If you're not sure, just go ahead and contact one of us and we'll help to clarify.
Jennifer, nothing to add further?
No, I think everything has been said.
Okay, well, that's very good. Well, with that out of the way then, I would like to thank all of our panelists for taking the time to explain the volume of use survey, and to reiterate what Matthias has just said, this information is very much for the greater good. It is very important. It underpins the work that both IFRA and RIFM carry out, and so it's very much in everyone's interests that this information is provided. It is obviously consolidated and anonymized and aggregated in a way that doesn't prevent any kind of identification, and does do a lot to make sure that at the end consumers are able to have fragrance products that are safe, transparent, and sustainable over the long run. And this is obviously important for the future of our industry. So with that, I would like to remind everyone that this webinar has been recorded, and it will be available publicly likely in the next few hours once the processing has been undertaken. Invitations will go out to everyone on our list for the future, for the update when the Q&A webinar takes place, and obviously all attendees of this webinar will be invited directly so that they know that it's happening. And with that, unless there are any remaining questions or comments, I would like to thank everyone again. Thank you all to the hundreds of participants who've joined us today. And I look forward to welcoming you to the next webinar. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. The VoU.